Yes. We're recording. Welcome. Happy Sunday, everyone. Or Monday morning if you're listening on Monday morning. The day of Game 5 in Los Playoffs. This is 40 Minutes of Hell. I'm your friend Joseph Craven. I'm joined by my co-host here with me on so many episodes of 40 Minutes of Hell over the past year or so. This is, of course, 1-year-old dog, Radar O'Reilly. I've introduced her many times as being 6, 7, 8-month-old puppy, whatever. No. As of June, she is turning 1 year old. I don't really know when the cutoff point is to be considered a puppy. I know that dogs really don't technically stop growing, depending on breed, I guess, but don't really stop growing until they're like a year and a half-ish, a year and a couple of months, but she ain't getting any bigger. We don't really know exactly when she was born, rescue dog and all that, but estimates point to about the middle of June, so we just made up that it was June 15th, and we're getting ready to celebrate later this week. She's a good dog. She's helped me out on this podcast. But we're not here to talk about dogs, as great as dogs may be, because they are the greatest. We're here to talk about basketball. As former Ole Miss basketball coach Rod Barnes had a tendency to say it, basketball. I always thought it was interesting, but I liked Rod Barnes. He seemed like a pretty chill guy. All right. Since the last episode, we've seen a handful of playoff games. We've gotten a better feel for both teams and the way that it's panning out here. We see, obviously, Golden State winning Game 2, and then Toronto taking the next two games to go up on that big-time 3-1 lead. A lot of interesting things happening in all three of these games here. It's going to be hard to hit on all of the major talking points, but I'm going to go for it anyway. Kind of game by game real quick. Some notes that I had. That's right. This is going to be basically taken straight out of like my immediate reaction notes for each of the games. Game 2 and 3, I was at my home able to watch and take a lot of detailed notes. Game 4, I was actually hanging out with 40 Minutes of Hell co-founder Ro Hunter. We had ourselves a little steak night at his house, sat around, red wine, steaks, basically a heart attack dinner. And so he and I talked a lot about the game then, but I did not take his meticulous notes meticulously. But there's really only a couple of major notes from Game 4 anyway. And we'll get there when the time is right. But Game 2 is the anomaly in this series so far, of course, being the Golden State victory. This was a game that I think this is what a lot of people were really expecting to see in the series from the Golden State Warriors. It's a close victory again, and Toronto's a very, very good team. But this was the game that people really thought, we'd see with a semi-healthy Warriors. Obviously, Klay missed Game 3, but he was there for Game 2. Dropped 25 points, shot 67% from 3-point range. Klay being Klay, playing that great defense. Interestingly enough, you actually saw the Warriors. In the playoffs, everyone goes down to like an 8-man rotation, essentially. I'm looking right here in Game 2. Yeah, Toronto had players that only, played... Yeah, Toronto only played 8 players at all in the game. Golden State went a little bit deeper. Golden State actually saw 11 players play at least 5 minutes of the game. Jonas Jerebko, Andrew Bogut, Alfonso McKinney did not play significant time. They didn't hit double digits as far as minute count goes. McKinney practically did. McKinney was like 13 seconds short. But McKinney, Bogut, Jerebko all logged at least a few minutes there. And then, of course, Kevon Looney, Sean Livingston, Quinn Cook. That was one of the biggest talking points coming out of Game 2, and a lot of media outlets really hit on that. The Warriors bench showed up. The Warriors role players, the Warriors bench players really showed up. That quasi includes DeMarcus Cousins in this regard. He started this game, which was a surprise to everyone, that Boogie Cousins actually started the game and played, very productive 27 minutes. But I still think you have to consider him just because of the coming back from injury and the role that he kind of plays in the whole flow of things. You have to consider Boogie Cousins to be still kind of a glorified bench player for the Warriors, even when he does start. Same way that like Andre Iguodala is a bench player, even though they love to start Iggy in that death lineup sort of situation. And so I think that starting Cousins, it's basically a bench player stepping up to the occasion, even if he is starting, because he's not healthy, and it showed in some of the later games, but it worked out for them in this particular game. That being said, it's easy to look at it and, just because the Warriors won and because Boogie Cousins was productive and because Klay Thompson did well, it's easy to look at it and kind of like operate under the assumption that the Warriors won this game by like double-digit points, and they didn't. It was only a 5-point victory for Golden State at all. The differences between game 1 and 2, one in particular is that Toronto did a wonderful job of hitting some big shots in order to stop the Warriors from getting momentum in game 1, okay? In game 2, that did not happen. They kind of did well enough, but they were not able to stop the Warriors from really doing their thing, especially the third quarter Warriors. They came back. They had a 34-point third quarter. The third quarter Warriors are their own thing. Everyone knows it at this point in time. It's almost impossible. The only team I've ever seen to actually out third quarter the Warriors was the Toronto Raptors in Game 4, which I think is fascinating. It really was the most fascinating point of Game 4, and the only major talking point I think to come out of Game 4, if you ask me, is the fact that the Toronto Raptors out Golden Stated Golden State. Let's jump back to Game 2 before we get to that, though. Zach Lowe on the Low Post podcast, which is my personal favorite basketball podcast. If you're not listening to it and you're listening to this, what is wrong with you? But Zach Lowe pointed out that while the third quarter Warriors did return and were going strong as Radar comes in with a squeaky toy, to give her contribution on the podcast. The biggest factor that led up to that was the fact that when the Warriors needed a clutch shot in the second quarter to keep the game from getting out of hand, they got those. They were not getting those in Game 1. Toronto was holding them off in Game 1. Toronto was the one who was getting the clutch shots to stop the Warriors from making a run in Game 1. In Game 2, that was reversed. Okay? That was the major deciding point. That's what set up the Warriors in their classic third quarter Warriors situation in Game 2. That's what the Warriors have not been able to replicate in Games 3 or 4. That's been the major struggle here, is the Warriors have not been able to play their game. Is that a byproduct of injury? To an extent, yes. I mean, missing Klay Thompson in Game 3 really threw things off for him. Klay Thompson and DeMarcus Cousins obviously being a little bit hobbled, that threw things off for him in the those particular games. And since Klay came back, missing Kevin Durant, I feel like does let them play a more natural style. I'm not going to jump into this stupid "are they better without Kevin Durant" debate, because that's dumb to try to say that they're better without one of the best players in the world. But the style, I think, is more natural to the way that the team really likes to play, or at least Steph, Klay, Draymond work off of each other. It's more natural when they don't have Kevin Durant. What Kevin Durant brings is that instant offense when the style isn't working, when the system isn't working, and they need something to happen, especially in the half court. That's what Kevin Durant does so well. And so, yes, they're missing that from him. But this Game 2 was the game in which their system and their style was able to work well. Part of that being the fact that DeMarcus Cousins stepped up. And I don't know if it was him understanding what he needed to do or if it was coaching instructions, but he kind of almost was a bit of an extra Draymond. He wasn't trying to be a big-time offensive weapon for them. He only attempted 8 shots. He only made 3 of them, but that's fine. He only attempted 8 shots. He got 10 rebounds, and he got 6 assists. And that's what's really important for Draymond Green. And for that, he kind of was trying to be a little bit more part of the system, as opposed to being, I said Draymond a second ago, that's important for Boogie Cousins. Boogie was trying to be part of the system. And that's what worked in game 2 quite a bit. That's what made him so effective, is that he came in and he's clearly not 100% recovered from the injury, but he came in and he didn't play like Boogie Cousins. He didn't play like the ball-hogging maniac baby that Boogie Cousins has been known to be in the past. He came in, he played a very mature game. He played a very team-first oriented game. It's not something we've seen him do a huge amount, and he did it very well. If that were to continue, then we could be looking at a little bit better series than what we've got as far as how the Warriors have been. But, then you've got the injury to Clay in Game 3. That was really, that throws things off because Clay is such a good perimeter defender and the perimeter defense just wasn't quite the same, so on and so forth. So Game 2 was the Warriors game. If Game 2 was the Warriors game though, we jump into Game 3. And before this game, I was happened to be watching the starters on TV, and J.E. Skeets predicted that this would be the Kyle Lowry game of the series, because there's been a Kyle Lowry game like once every series so far in the playoffs. This had to be the one, right? This was it. And it was, a very good one from Kyle Lowry. I'm pulling up the stats right now because I didn't quite have them. This was the big victory, the 123-109 victory, crazy victory for Toronto. Kyle Lowry in particular dropping 23 points, hitting 5 3-pointers. That was huge. That was absolutely huge. Danny Green as well. This was where things started to really shift back out of Game 2 mode and into something else. Now, yeah, I do think that missing Klay Thompson was, a pretty significant, key to all of this, because he is such a good perimeter defender. Normally he would be out there to help cover Kyle Lowry or Danny Green off of some of those offensive sets that, create screens and then try to free up the shooter. Normally he would be there to at least recover from those, or to help the team recover from those, and he was not available, and that really threw things off. The referees, the officiating wasn't great in general. That was the game where they missed like 3 different, should have been goaltending calls, and there is that. But that wasn't the deciding point of the game. The deciding point of the game is that this was the game where the rest of the Raptors supporting cast. If Game 2 was the Warriors supporting cast, Game 3 was the Raptors supporting cast game. Now, it's weird to call Kyle Lowry a supporting player for the Raptors, because he is, he's the captain of the ship. They built the team with him and DeMar DeRozan. So it's interesting to see. But he's embraced, it's interesting to make that claim, but he has embraced, I think, being kind of not a role player, but not being the guy. He's embraced being the third weapon in an offense that's all about Kawhi, Pascal Siakam at this point. And when it works well, it works very, very well. This was another game in which Toronto was able to hang with the third quarter Warriors. This was not... Game 4 was the game in which they out-Warriors the Warriors. Gosh, that was difficult to say. But Game 3, they were able to hang with them. And that's kind of been the key to success in the series, is whether or not you can hang with them. But this game was also dictated by the fact that Toronto opened up the first with 36 points. Right out of the gate, they come out, they're hitting big shots, they're scoring a lot of points. They're trying to rattle an injury-plagued Warriors team, and that's really significant. Now, none of this, I don't think should be that surprising, because it's just hard to win 3 titles in a row. I've said that a million times on this podcast, and I'll say it a million more times. But in order to win 3 titles in a row, you have a major part of that is that you have to just flat out get super lucky, especially with injuries, okay? And that's what the Warriors have been trying to avoid. You sign Kevin Durant so that you have a backup if something happens to Klay Thompson, or vice versa. If something happens to KD, you like that Klay Thompson's out there to be another perimeter shooter and defender and all of that. You don't expect both of them to go down. You bring in Boogie Cousins as some sort of cover, or just because, heck, you don't know what you're going to get with him, but you're able to pay him, the minimum, just because he wants to ring chase. you don't expect Boogie Cousins to never fully get over bad injuries, to get another bad injury after he's just getting over his original bad injury. You don't expect those sort of things. You prepare and you prepare and you prepare, but sometimes you just catch some really bad breaks. Yes, there's a little bit of sacrifice to depth, I guess, when you pile up a bunch of all-stars in the starting lineup, but I think it's ludicrous to try to say that the Warriors have no depth or have no role players, because just look at Game 2, where their depth and role players were the reason they won. DeMarcus Cousins playing the type of game that he played, that was a major factor. Quinn Cook coming in and hitting 3 3-pointers, that's a major factor. Andrew Bogut, Air Bogut coming in Game 2, catching some lobs and stuff. Alfonso McKinney, Jonas Jerebko, them being able to just play any minutes at all to spell the starters is huge. The depth of the Warriors is there. And, I'm just going to flat out say it. This broadcasting team is terrible. So much so that I jokingly created a change.org petition to have them replaced for the finals. Jeff Van Gundy and Mark Jackson bring nothing to the broadcast. This is all obviously my opinion, but this is the opinion of a guy that, loves good journalism, and these guys are not good for journalism. Mark Jackson in Game 2 was very adamant about saying that the Warriors had no depth, acting like the Warriors were a weak team, and acting like them, that sacrifice. You have to sacrifice some depth when you sign a guy like Kevin Durant. When you go after Kevin Durant, you know that your depth's going to struggle a little bit. Look, I get that there is some of that, but when you pile up a whole bunch of all-stars in the starting lineup, then your Game 2 in particular, is sealed by a quote-unquote role player in Andre Iguodala hitting a 3 that he had no business taking or making. Andrew Bogut's coming in and catching alley-oops. DeMarcus Cousins is stepping up to be a replacement starter and is playing a completely different style of game than he ever has in his entire life, and it's evident. Like, that's depth, okay? That's depth. When your depth is you're able to bring in former All-NBA players in off your bench in Andre Iguodala and DeMarcus Cousins, okay, so what? You got hurt, now they have to become starters for you in Game 2. That's not a weak bench. The Warriors don't have a weak bench. I mean, Jeff Van Gundy said it a whole lot in Game 3 when the Warriors dropped down big. Jeff Van Gundy was in rare form in Game 3, by the way. He tried to take credit for coming up with Serge Ibaka, or Ibaka as he'd said it. Terrible. But in particular, he said that this Golden State Warrior team, the way that they were that they fielded, would not even make the Western Conference playoffs. Okay? Let's just revel on that for a second. He was trying to claim that a team that only had Steph Curry, Andre Iguodala, DeMarcus Cousins, Draymond Green, all right, would not even make the playoffs in the Western Conference. I mean, I understand that missing Klay and KD is huge, okay? But you literally have their replacements in your starting lineup as former All-NBA players in Draymond Green, or not Draymond Green, in Boogie Cousins and Andre Iguodala, okay? How is that not, still a good enough squad? How is it not? It's diminishing what the Raptors are doing when you try to come up with an excuse like, oh, the Warriors just don't have enough bench depth because they sacrifice so much bench depth to sign all these All-Stars. No, you sign the All-Stars so that's not an issue. You sign the All-Star. Not only that, but let's be honest, if anyone wants to ring chase, all they have to do is go say, hey, look, I got no problem taking the minimum and playing for Golden State, I got no problem taking a back seat a little bit, playing for Golden State, trying to ring chase a little bit. Some of those older veterans. It's not going to be an issue for Golden State to get depth if they want to go after getting depth. Because there's going to be enough players out there that, just want to be on a winning team. Not even just ring chasing, okay? That's taking it to an extreme, and I apologize for taking it to an extreme. Not even just ring chasing, just players that want to play on a winning team for once and maybe have never had that luxury. I mean, that's kind of why Andre Iguodala went out there to begin with. is that he had always been the centerpiece of teams before. He'd been the guy that they tried to build teams around, and it wasn't quite working quite right. And I think he just really wanted to be able to take a bit of a back seat, to not have to be the guy and just be on a successful team. And I do not blame him at all for that, and I think that's fine. I mean, that's actually what DeMarcus Cousins said about why he signed with the Warriors for so cheap. Is he did say, I believe his line was, he's like, I'm not at a place in my career in which I feel like I have to prove anything to anyone anymore. You know, he's like, I should be reaping the rewards of my hard work. You know, the people know what they get out of me at this point. And he's totally right in that. You know, he's not at a point in which we're like, okay, he could take a huge amount of money and go to a struggling team, and they can try to build around him. No. If he doesn't want to deal with that anymore, he doesn't have to deal with that anymore because he's paid his dues. That's why he went to a successful team, you know, for no money at all, because he's like, whatever, I want to go to a successful team. I want to go play in the NBA finals. You know, I want to have a better chance at winning a ring because I feel like I'm you know, owed that, or I feel like I've proven enough by now. And that's a totally fair point. The Warriors, I don't like the idea that the Warriors have an inferior bench, that the Warriors are like struggling from a bench perspective, when Toronto is able to drop 123 points on them in a finals game where 7 players played 20 or more minutes, and the next highest total minutes came from Norman Powell with 6 minutes and 13 seconds, okay? That game 3, Toronto was able to get 43 minutes out of Kyle Lowry, 38 out of Pascal Siakam, 38 out of Kawhi Leonard, 27 out of Danny Green, 26 out of Marc Gasol, 33 minutes out of Fred VanVleet, almost 22 minutes, 21:50 out of Serge Ibaka, all right? You can't just say that the Warriors are struggling with their depth. They don't have enough depth. They don't have the depth. When Toronto is able to have the biggest margin of victory in the series off of only 7 players, all right? Especially considering their top player off the bench, Fred VanVleet, 33 minutes. That man was undrafted out of college. He's not a former All-NBA player. He was undrafted. Toronto is playing the series of a lifetime right now. And that's the deciding factor. Not the Warriors' lack of depth, not the injuries, partly the injuries. The injuries have more to do with it than the lack of depth. But the fact that Toronto's just doing a lot of things really, really freaking well right now. I feel like maybe that's like the major point that I want to make at all times in this podcast at all, is that, I mean, Toronto's just doing a lot of things right. When they need a big-time three-pointer, VanVleet or Danny Green has them covered. When they need, they're playing great defense. They're playing the type of defense that will rattle the Warriors out of their system and their scheme, you know. That's one of the reasons why they went after Kawhi Leonard so hard. And what he does that's much different and much better than DeMar DeRozan, who I think is a heck of a player. I'm a big DeMar DeRozan fan. But like Kawhi is just such a unique and elite defender that is a major change in the way that the game or the team can play, having him as opposed to DeRozan. It allows them to play enough of a defensive style that shakes the Warriors off of their groove. And then, as we saw in Game 4, allows the offense for Toronto to then actually, take over that groove themselves. 37 points in the third quarter to rip the game open. Kawhi Leonard doing his Kawhi Leonard thing and having himself 12 rebounds and 36 points. My goodness. Another game in which when they needed someone to step up, they got it. Serge Ibaka was able to put in 20 points, which is, got to be easily far and away the most he has scored in the finals so far. If I'm looking back, that's, far and away. So they actually got 10 minutes out of Norman Powell, which has not happened very often for Toronto. Game 4 is very impressive because it's showing something very specific here that one of the reasons why it's hard to win 3 games in a row, one of the reasons why it's hard to really be a complete dynasty absolutely dominant dynasty that wins all the time, is that other teams are going to adapt to what you do over time. There's very few, I feel like, teams in the NBA that have a particular system to them where you could put in specific players into the system and it just works, right? We've seen it for years and years and years with the San Antonio Spurs. Greg Popovich is the absolute king of, this is my system, and I find players that fit the system, and boom, we have success off of that, right? They're in the process now where I don't know if he'll be able to bounce back from it because he doesn't really have the tools, the building blocks. He's getting up to a point in which I feel like he's got to be thinking about retirement, blah, blah, blah. But the Spurs have always had this system. That's what made Golden State successful, is that they drafted these three players in Steph Curry, Draymond Green, Klay Thompson, that they're able to build an incredible system around that involved elite, perimeter shooting, absolutely dominant defender in Draymond Green, who happens to be, honestly, I've always said that LeBron James was like the next evolution of Scottie Pippen, but truth be told, it's Draymond Green in a lot of ways. Draymond is Scottie Pippen. He gets the rebounds. He plays incredible defense. He gets the assists. When he needs to score some points, he can. That's where I feel like LeBron, obviously that's like similar body size and build, and that's what made LeBron James more like Scottie in my mind. But Draymond, because Draymond's not like a true point forward, but he's got a lot of that ability in him. Anyway, all that to say, they've got the accessory piece in Draymond, the do-it-all forward who does, literally everything. And I don't know. He's just phenomenal. That's a system that has worked really well. They go after Sean Livingston. Guess what? They are able to plug in Sean Livingston as a backup guard who creates in the half court when they need something, off the bench in the half court. He hadn't been great this year. He's, getting a little bit older. Let's not forget that he had that terrible knee injury that I'm sure shortened his career. Even after being able to come back from all that, you don't play for, 15 more years after off an injury like that. You just don't. They go and they get Andre Iguodala, who becomes, the quintessential sixth man off the bench in the system. It works well. Kevin Durant was like the departure from the system. And that's just to try to keep things fresh. They went after one of the best players in the world, one of the most unguardable offensive talents, because they needed to keep the half-court set fresh. And that's what they did there. Boogie Cousins was also an attempt to keep things fresh that we never really saw as much of an impact because he spent so much time injured. But the Warriors have a great system, and when it works so well, it's unstoppable. The Raptors have built a team right now that just can stop the system. They can stop the flow. They can stop what the Warriors do so well. That's what we're seeing more than anything else. It's not a knock on the Warriors and the way that they're performing. Part of it does come down to injuries. That always impacts you. But it's hard to win 3 in a row, partly because if you're a team that works off a system so well, then teams are going to literally build entire rosters and entire schemes, entire systems to counteract your system. This is what we're seeing right now. Toronto's doing an incredible job of controlling the finals and limiting and controlling the system like they can. That being said, there's only one time in history, right? And we all know it, that a team has come back from 3-1 down to win the NBA Finals. It happened against the Warriors. You gotta know that they are chomping at the bit to be able to say, now we get to be the team that comes back from that. So Monday night will be a major telling point as to whether or not they have it in them. I think they're trying to get Kevin Durant healthy enough to come out there. It's going to be a real shame if at the end of this whole series, people treat it where it's like, man, they won, good for them, but the Warriors were really injured. It's going to be a real shame if that's if that's what comes out of this, because it's going to completely devalue everything that Toronto's done very well. And like I said, that's what I hope to try to avoid as best I can. Hey, with the amount of time we have left, why don't we talk a little bit about the upcoming off-season in the NBA? There's been a few moves right now that have been going on. For example, you've seen Atlanta and Brooklyn make a trade that really seems to work well for both teams. This was an interesting trade because it highlights a couple of things. The details of the trade, first and foremost. Brooklyn moved Alan Crabb, the 17th pick, and a lottery-protected 2020 first rounder over to Atlanta for Taurean Prince and a 2021 second rounder. This is an interesting one because this is an attempt from Brooklyn to free up a lot of cap space or free up more cap space because they're trying hard to get to win some in free agency this year. Obviously, they're trying as hard as possible to bring in Kyrie Irving. In particular, that's kind of the Nets' main target. Atlanta's trying to go the route of building through the draft. They picked Trae Young, who had a phenomenal rookie season this past year. That it brings, let's see, how many draft picks do they have? They have like 6 different picks. Yeah, I think they have like 6 different picks in the draft, something like that. Basically, Atlanta's trying to they're trying to do what I always do in NBA 2K, which, by the way, if you're listening to this right now, jump on to whatever you have. If you don't own the game, it's only $3 on like the PlayStation Store and I think the Xbox Store. So like you got no excuse to pick it up and have something to do during the summer until the next game comes out. But it's like what I always do on NBA 2K, piling up as many draft picks as humanly possible in order to just have trading ammunition. That's kind of what Atlanta's doing here. They're either going to have a lot of picks to be able to draft a young team and develop them all together, which I think is the best way to build a team, by the way. I think it is the only way that is really shown to be the most reliable way to do it, is to draft well and develop a team together. I'm just saying. And Brooklyn's going the opposite route where they're trying to free up as much space. Right now, they've got enough cap space to offer 2 max contracts to free agents, which is an intriguing proposition in and of itself. Now, one of the things that we're seeing here is a lot of reports, including from old Adrian Woj of ESPN, Wojnarowski. They're really predicting that Cleveland and Atlanta are going to try to work something out because Atlanta would want to move up a little bit higher, and Cleveland just kind of needs some young assets. Atlanta, this is funny. Atlanta's Travis Schlenk has openly said that the organization does not want 5 rookies on the upcoming roster. So there is that going on. That's an interesting trade because it'll be it's just kind of very curious to see what the two teams could do, but it's very curious to see what they do in the different mentalities. Atlanta going through draft picks, through trades like that, and Brooklyn going through free agency, clearing up to get those max spaces available. This is a storyline. I don't know where it's going to go, obviously, but it'd be a very interesting storyline to follow along with because it's 2 different mentalities. See, we can actually compare which one actually does better. It's really not often you get to actually have 2 situations that you can actually directly compare like that. So I think that's very, very interesting. Some of the other interesting storylines going on right now, one of them being that the city of Dallas is planning on renaming Olive Street to Nowitzki Way. Which I think is really, really cool. Let's see, the quote right here is that Dallas City Council member Adam Medrano submitted the proposal to rename a 3-block stretch of what is now Olive Street between Field Street and Victory Avenue to Nowitzki Way. This particular stretch of road sits right in front of like the entryway into American Airlines Center, so that's why he picked this particular area. But in particular, he was at a conference in Phoenix and happened to see that they had Diana Taurasi Way. And he said, that's the direct quote was, so I'm like, that would be cool if we had that. Everyone's been hearing about a statue once Dirk retires. I think that people always talked about that, kind of like they have around Staples with all the players. I thought that renaming a street after Nowitzki would be cool. Dirk is one of those, rare examples of a lifer that you just don't see as much. I mean, not even Michael Jordan was a lifer. Not even Scottie Pippen was a lifer. Dirk stayed on the Mavericks team his entire career. He brought a title to Dallas. He was the centerpiece of a team that went through many different iterations. I mean, it just makes sense to honor the guy because he might have been the first truly great Dallas Maverick player. They had some good players. I mean, back in the day, I'm not trying to devalue like the legends that they had years ago, especially back in the 80s, I believe, is when they had some really good teams there. But no one has brought more to the Mavericks, obviously, than Dirk Nowitzki. Honor him whatever possible way that you can. Just saying. Another little note on this isn't free agency, but an ongoing saga out of New Orleans. Reports are still saying that even after meeting with David Griffin a couple of times, Anthony Davis is still planning on leaving the franchise, or at least still wanting to. It makes sense. I mean, you don't show up to the final regular season game with a shirt that says, "That's all, folks," and expect people to, like, really want you to stick around that much, especially a team like New Orleans, who, I'll be honest with you, does not really, like, pander to star players that much. Like, if you are bought into the city, you're going to be beloved, and if you're not bought in, then they're like, we don't need you, because it's a city that's going to have a absolute willingly carry a chip on their shoulder for these sort of things. Just look at the reaction after the Rams beat them in the NFC Championship game, and look at just after the trade request from AD was even submitted. Look at that, their fan base. It's a city that's going to absolutely hold it against you, and it's not easy to come back from that unless you yourself as a player are flat out willing to apologize for your actions, which I just don't see coming out of Anthony Davis. Yes, I know that the franchise has failed him a lot in the past by never really putting together the type of team that brings a huge amount of success or really works well. But it makes me wonder as well whether he's just not that great of a leader that they can build around. If Drew Holiday is obviously, like the most well-respected player on your franchise, then perhaps, you are not the leader that you should be as a former number one overall pick and guy that was seemingly buying into the culture of the city and all of that sort of thing. That saga will continue. It's no great surprise if he's sticking with his guns that he wants out. New Orleans, what people still fail to realize is that New Orleans still holds all the ammunition there in those trade talks, because they don't have to trade him immediately. They didn't have to trade him before the end of this season. They don't have to trade him right now. It may be advantageous to work out a deal right when the draft is coming along, if they really think that they can package the number one pick, Zion Williamson, if they can package that with, say, a number 3 pick and try to get his college teammate RJ Barrett as well. Memphis not going to budge with that number 2 because Ja Morant just fits so perfectly what they want to do. But, if they think that's a good deal there, if they think it's a good deal to move him for, maybe another big-time player that could put in a few more good years and help train Zion Williamson. If they don't want to try to have to, survive and really succeed with rookies next season, maybe they want to bring in a very, very good, veteran player as well to give Zion some time, along with Drew Holiday, to rebuild. It doesn't really work that well most of the time, but, that's one mentality. All right, last little note we're going to get in, the NCAA. That's right, we're going to talk about the NCAA for just a minute here, but they've announced a couple of rule changes for the upcoming season, if you're not familiar with these. One of them in particular being that the shot clock resets to 20 seconds after an offensive rebound. The other one being that now that we are 10 years after the three-point line, moving back, they're moving the three-point line even farther back. The shot clock. What was I going to say? Free throw clock? That doesn't make any sense. The shot clock change is an interesting one because it's lowering it by an entire 10 seconds. Should hopefully improve the pace of play in college basketball, which I've said many times before. I think it's just college basketball is a big mess right now. It just is. They change so much stuff every year and how things are called every year, and it takes referees too long to adjust to it. It's kind of a mess. So it's interesting that they're, putting these things in here right now as well. But we are 10 years removed from the 3-point line being moved back the first time around. Now they're going to do it again. So it was moved back, I believe, from 19 feet 9 inches to 20 feet 9 inches 10 years ago. I think 19.9 was the original distance. Someone can correct me if that is incorrect. So it was moved back a foot. They're moving it back now from 20 feet 9 inches to the international distance of 22 feet 1 3/4 inches. So about a foot and a half ish farther back now, a bigger change than it was 10 years ago. The statistics on this were interesting. Right when the 3-point line was moved back, the overall 3-point percentage across all of college basketball dropped an entire percentage point the following season. Since then, in the decade since that change was introduced, the percentage has gone right back up to exactly where it was before the line was moved back. So they think it's time to move it back anyway. Here's the official rationale, okay? This is the official word from the NCAA, and this is what makes it very, very interesting to me. One reasoning, making the lane more available for dribble drive plays from the perimeter. Man, college basketball loves a dribble drive play. Assisting in offensive spacing by requiring the defense to cover more of the court. Okay, that's good. That's interesting. You can't be as compact. This is the one that gets me. Slowing the trend of the 3-point shot becoming too prevalent in men's college basketball by making the shot a bit more challenging, while at the same time keeping the shot an integral part of the game. Okay, NCAA, this is yet another instance of where you've completely missed the point. The wording itself is even bad. Slowing the trend of the 3-point shot becoming more, too prevalent. It's not embracing the trend of the 3-point shot becoming too prevalent. Slowing the trend. The NCAA, once again, instead of trying to create a sport that is more watchable, more entertaining, more free-flowing, they are trying to slow the trend that the game is going in. They're trying to slow down the natural progression of the sport. The NCAA, full of control freaks, is trying once again to control something that they really have no business controlling. Look at the NBA. Look at the way they've embraced the 3-pointer. Look at the way that everyone shoots threes. It makes the game crazy to watch because now everyone has to be able to guard the perimeter. Everyone has to be able to attack from the perimeter. The NCAA is trying, on the other hand, to open up the lane a lot more, to make it more lane-centric, to slow the trend of the 3-point shot becoming too prevalent. The NCAA is missing the point in so many things, but I think choosing to use that language of slowing the trend is maybe the dumbest thing of all because it completely shows how much they miss the point of adapting to the direction that the game is going. They don't want to adapt to anything. They want to be in control, and they're going to be upset if they're ever not in control. And that's the way the NCAA works. That's the way they've worked for years. We see it all the time. There we go. I'm going to get off the soapbox before it gets too ridiculous. But that is, I think, a very poor choice of words. All right, I'm your friend Joseph Craven. This has been 40 Minutes of Hell here on this Sunday afternoon/evening, the day before Game 5 of the NBA Finals. By the time we get around to another episode of this, we could be looking at NBA champion Toronto Raptors, which is really fascinating to see. Or we could be looking at the verge of, on the cusp of, only the second time a team has ever come back from 3-1 down, which is just as, if not more, exciting. So wherever the direction goes in the playoffs, one thing is certain. This is the most interesting and perhaps monumental NBA Finals that we've had in 3 years. I'm your friend Joseph Craven. Thank you again for listening to 40 Minutes of Hell. On behalf of 1-year-old dog Radar O'Reilly, we'll see you next time.